Good. Welcome to the JCPS MTSS Classroom Systems that Support Behavior Toolkit training on the application Contingency Contracting. I'm April Bemker, MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher with the AIS Zone, working with middle and high schools.
I'm Dominique Dobson-Penn, MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher with Elementary AIS Zone.
Please take a moment to type the case-sensitive bit.ly found in the center of the screen into your web browser. This will allow you access to all the links and activities and resources offered throughout this presentation. This slide shows the components of MTSS. MTSS focuses on overall school improvement by aligning resources and support for both teachers and students. We provide multiple levels of support for learners that address academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs and produce professional development that is aligned with schools and the district as a whole. This concept map shows a visual of the MTSS departments in JCPS. The MTSS Academic Department provides teachers with Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention and academic support. This department is led by Donna Lawson. The MTSS Behavior Department supports schools in implementing school-wide behavior systems and frameworks, which includes PBIS and restorative practices. The point of contact for the Behavior Department is Sandra Hensel. The goal of our department, the MTSS Engagement Department, which is led by Dr. Brahim, is to increase student achievement by equipping teachers with high-yield pedagogical practices to maximize student engagement. Dr. Naomi Brahim's contact information, as well as Sandra and Donna's, are linked in the slide. 6 MTSS toolkits were created by our department to provide resources for Tier 1 instructional practices to increase student engagement, reduce student behaviors, and decrease disproportionality. Our website is linked on the image. The application of contingency contracting is included in our classroom systems that support student behavior toolkit. These systems use academic and behavior data to put short and long-term supports in place to help students be successful. The Classroom Systems Toolkit includes 3 research-based high-yield practices that should be implemented first before utilizing the application of contingency contracting. These 3 high-yield practices, or HYPs, are foundational to student success. Student-teacher relationships, the first HYP, leads to greater achievement when a teacher interacts with students positively in order to cultivate optimal environments, which should result in fewer problem behaviors. Note that teachers have the majority of the responsibility for the quality of relationships with students. The second HYP, Classroom Management and Classroom Behavioral Practices, involves teachers establishing rules and expectations. Once these are established, engaging effective strategies to maintain a positive climate is important. Clear rules with consistent feedback and enforcement will help lead to increased student self-control. The last high-yield practice in this toolkit is teacher expectations of performance. Teachers should communicate high expectations and provide feedback on the performance related to those expectations, which affects student achievement and behavior. By regularly communicating expectations, teaching, prompting, emphasizing growth and progress, and encouraging student success, instructional time will be maximized. Contingency contracting involves a behavior contract, which is a written agreement between the student and teacher regarding the reinforcement that is available for a very specific type and level of behavior. This strategy is useful for students who have difficulty following through due to lack of motivation. The advantage of this process is that it formalizes the contingencies of reinforcements and it involves the student. Before we dive into more specifics of contingency contracting, let's talk about tiered or layered supports. Notice the graphic on the slide showing the various levels of support, starting with Tier 1, which is for all students, being the foundation. Tier 2 supports layered on top and provide in addition to Tier 1 for a small percentage of students, with Tier 3 layered on both of these and provided for an even smaller percentage of students. So our focus for today's training, contingency contracting or use of a behavior contract, is considered a tier 3 support or intervention. It should not be used as a first-line strategy. It should be considered with a very small percentage of students that need further support after trying tier 1 and tier 2 strategies and interventions. Successful use of this application is when students are motivated to exhibit wanted behaviors through a contract in which reinforcers are contingent on the student exhibiting the desired behavior. In today's training, we will learn how to utilize contingency contracting in order to reinforce specific behavior in the classroom. You will reflect on how you can implement contingency contracting when needed in your classroom. As we mentioned just a minute ago, contingency contracting should really be used as a tier 3 intervention. We wanted to touch base on one tier 2 strategy that should be tried before a behavior contract, and that is check-in, check-out, or CICO. CICO is used with a small percentage of students who need additional support with behavior success. It involves a student checking in with a caring adult at the beginning of the day to set goals, the student's teachers rewarding points to the student throughout the day tied to those goals, and the student checking in with their caring adult again at the end of the day. CICO should allow students to earn incentives and incorporate student choice. If you would like training on or resources for CICO, please reach out to your district MTSS behavior resource teacher or to Sandra Hensel, whose contact info is linked on slide 3 in this presentation.
Now let's take a look at contingency contracting, specifically why you might use it. First, it provides students with more one-on-one help, support, and intervention, and it holds students accountable. It also provides structure, routine, consistency, and organization while prompting self-responsibility. It can improve students' grades and accountability and their buy-in by helping to increase student motivation and effort. Lastly, it helps to improve communication between school and home. When should you use it? Before we get into when, let's talk for a moment about student-teacher relationships. For greatest success with classroom management and positive interactions, you should work to build a strong, positive relationship with each of your students. If you do that, then you will better know when a student behaves in a certain manner, whether it's an isolated or a persistent behavior, and you'll know what strategies and supports will best fit for that student. As we mentioned earlier, contingency contracting or a behavior contract is for tier 3, a very small percentage of students. After trying tier 1 and tier 2 support options, it should be used when students exhibit persistent behavior problems or persistent emotional difficulties, like frustration, anxiety, or tantrums. It can also be used when students consistently fail to complete daily class or school requirements like work, behavior expectations, peer interactions, lunch, etc. Or if students are very unorganized. It might be used for students who are defiant and oppositional. Let's take a moment to reflect on and ask ourselves when to use contingency contracting. When a student has an unexpected outburst, should you use contingency contracting or not? The answer is no. You should not use contingency contracting. If it's a somewhat isolated, one-time occurrence, then you should use other strategies first. If the behavior happens again, you should want to monitor to see how often it is occurring and reassess what supports to provide. When a student is defiant and oppositional, should you use contingency contracting or not? The answer could be yes. Use contingency contracting. If this is an ongoing behavior and you've tried other tier 1 and tier 2 supports, such as check in and check out, when a student consistently fails to complete class requirements, should you use contingency contracting or not? The answer is yes. You should use contingency contracting as a strategy. The key is if they are consistently failing. When a student complains or whines, should you use contingency contracting or not? The answer is no. You should not use contingency contracting. Try some other behavior strategies first, such as giving the student a choice between two equal activities. When a student gets antsy or needs a break, should you use contingency contracting or not? The answer is no. You should not use contingency contracting for similar reasons as the last example. When a student exhibits persistent emotional difficulties, should you use contingency contracting or not? The answer is yes. You should use contingency contracting. The difference between this example and the first one we shared is that this student is exhibiting persistent emotional difficulties, whereas the first one was unexpected and a one-time occurrence. For that small percentage of students who need this Tier 3 strategy, let's look at the steps to consider and learn prior to implementing contingency contracting. First, identify a problem behavior. For example, a student persistently talks out during class. Step 2, determine the most appropriate replacement behavior. For example, a student must raise their hand and wait to be called upon before talking. Step 3, establishes a meeting time and a place so you can create a written behavior contract. So for example, you may tell a student, hey, after lunch, let's sit down and create a written contract to help you remember to raise your hand instead of just talking out loud. Step 4, be sure to write the contract using age-appropriate wording and form it in a form of an if-then statement. Step 5, when writing the first contract, modify the criteria so the student is likely to be successful. For example, you might write the student will raise their hand 50% of the time instead of talking out loud for 1 week. Step 6, come up with the appropriate reinforcer together for meeting that criteria. For example, how about you will be in charge of the game at recess on Friday if you raise your hand instead of talking out loud all week. Step 7, teach the student how to come to an agreement with both the teacher and the student so that way everyone feels it is fair. For example, talk to the student about arriving at an agreement where there is a benefit for both parties. Step 8, specify the criteria in writing so that the student and teacher are clear on the expected behavior, rewards, and duration of that contract. The last 4 steps focus on monitoring, reinforcing, and record keeping. So for step 9, schedule times for monitoring progress. Provide verbal reinforcements as the student performs the target behavior specified in the contract, and provide reinforcers immediately when and if criteria are met. Step 10, review criteria. Both teacher and student sign written agreement. This helps with formalizing the agreement and student commitment. Step 11, make 2 copies for both the student and the teacher to refer to. You might tell the student, I'm going to take a copy to your desk and I will keep a copy too, so we can both go over the agreement if needed. The last step, monitor the plan by recording whether problem behavior occurs less and or appropriate behavior occurs more. So the student raises their hand instead of calling out 95% of the time. Could be an example. Self-assessment tips and questions to consider and reflect upon. Take a moment and pause the video if needed to think about any student you have with persistent behavior or emotional issues. If you have any students like that who have not been successful with Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports, could they benefit from a contingency contract? Some things you should consider when using contingency contracting. The correct reinforcer amount is just enough to motivate the student to be successful and no more. This is sometimes trial and error. Too little will not work, and too much will make it difficult to fade. Reinforcers are limited to things that can be provided in a natural manner. Curricular-based reinforcers are the most natural and easy to fade. Fade contracts to be less frequent and increasingly subtle in nature. Reserve written contracts for the most problematic behaviors. Behavior contracts must fade over time, extending both the amount of behavior and the length of time. Teachers that approach their behavior support systems through a lens of equity, undo systematic opposition, and remove behaviors for learning. Teachers must be mindful of cultural norms or students. To create a communal environment, students must be appreciated within their own distinct intersectionalities, such as race, ethnicity, gender, ability, language, and socioeconomic background, so they can become outstanding citizens in the classroom and community. Students with exceptional needs may require additional behavioral supports to be successful in the classroom. With students who are exhibiting particular problem behavior, consider using a functional behavioral assessment, or FBA, to collect data to determine the function or purpose of a behavior and to determine the occasions in which behavior takes place. Classrooms that foster deeper learning empower students to be more independent and take a more active role in their learning process, creating a highly collaborative classroom where teachers frequently model, assess, and offer feedback on listening, paraphrasing, and artful questioning and negotiating sets the stage for deeper learning to occur. For this type of engagement in PBL, teachers need to design systems and structures that facilitate collaboration and creativity. When reflecting on your own practice, consider the following as possible next steps for dealing with classroom misbehaviors. Monitor not only success and failure with the contract, but also the number of reminders necessary to get success. Keep copies of all contracts forms as evidence. Be sure to reference the Classroom Systems Toolkit for more information. This slide includes supports from the MTSS plan and JCPS behavior intervention grid, and it is also linked on this slide. This grid gives potential interventions for commonly seen classroom misbehaviors. With the bit.ly we provided at the beginning of this training, you will have access to explore these resources for more information on contingency contracting, as well as other positive behavior supports that you could use with your classes. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about contingency contracting. For more information about our department and our instructional toolkits, please visit our website, which is linked on this slide. Have a great day.